Instant Enlightenment Transformation. Rabbi Yisroel Cotlar, the spiritual leader of Chabad of Cary, North Carolina, guides anyone who has been searching for a meaningful life and conscious living. Join our discussions about the mundane, our daily activities, and then infuse every day with a spiritual twist from the inspired sages of the Talmud and Jewish mysticism, which many call Kabbalah. We learn from the root source of all religious monotheistic traditions and delve into the symbolism and levels of meaning from biblical stories.
Over there if anyone wants. I should put it on the table. Good morning, everyone, to our audience here in Cary, North Carolina, joining us live, as well as those all around the world. We would love to hear from you. Send us a chat that you're listening in. Even better, a question. We would love to have your participation. Today's class is a good one. It's an interesting one. We're going to give a Jewish spin on health and fitness. So we know why it's important from a health perspective, but sometimes, especially for us rabbis, that extra motivation, hearing a religious perspective on health and fitness helps. But we're going to get there by means of some other very unique and fascinating issue in the Torah. We are going to begin on page 128. Who here has read Merchant of Venice?
In high school years ago.
All right. Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare.
Oh, yeah.
So only a few? Watched it? Anyone?
Yes.
I can't even remember.
I can't even remember.
Okay. So if you remember, there was a lot of discussion as to whether that had anti-Semitic kind of undertones, because the fellow over there whose name actually wasn't particularly Jewish. Someone remind me of his name. Shylock. There we go. Shylock. People say it might come from the Hebrew shalach, but he's trying to portray a Jew, and he has his buddy that he can't stand, Antonio. All right, that's right, Antonio. And Antonio is so humbled by the fact that he has to borrow money from Shylock. They can't stand each other, and Antonio wants to borrow the money, and that's when Shylock says, happy to do so, and I'll give it to you interest-free. However, if you don't pay back in time, then a pound of flesh. That was, if I remember, a pound of flesh next to the heart, right? Was that where it was? Or did he mention an area or not?
I don't think so.
No?
That's how you know he wasn't Jewish.
And, you know, the story goes on, and in the end, Shylock has his downfall. The details of the story are not important. However, that idea that the Jews, first of all, Jews are always the money lenders, right? So that, you know, and while historically that had some truth to it, many Jews were involved in that kind of business. It wasn't because they wanted to. It was because a lot of other professions were forbidden for them to do.
When you can own land.
Yeah, I mean, you can't own land, and you can't do this, and, well, you gotta, yeah. In any event, what's fascinating is you have Talmudic scholars discuss whether or not that could even have been a Jewish perspective. What would happen if someone made such a claim? If you don't pay me back, pound of flesh.
Sounds like he's from Italy.
But what would be the halachic, the Jewish legal? All right. And again, you're getting the other person to agree to it.
I thought there was something, if you lend it to a Jewish person, then it's one thing. If you lend it to a
That has to do
person,
that has to do with
something else.
interest. That has to do with
Okay.
interest. And you know, you mentioned it, so I should take the opportunity to clarify that, because that is something that turns people wrong a lot. That people never have difficulties understanding that. The Torah says that you're not supposed to lend interest to a Jew, but you are allowed to do it to a non-Jew. And that's something that many people get upset about. But I think one perspective on that is what's normal, with interest or not interest. With, that's typical. So basically, in modernity. So basically, all it's saying is when you deal with your mishpacha, when you deal with your family, you're not allowed to do it with interest. Instead of looking at it as, how come we're allowed to charge interest to non-Jews? That's, in modernity, that is the typical way business works. The surprise is the fact that the Torah prohibits us charging interest to our fellows, because we're supposed to view the Jewish people as our mishpacha, our family. So there is that law, but this is not interest as in money. Yeah.
So getting to the
I'm just
question,
gonna close the door. How do you mind closing the door just because?
never minding the appropriateness of the interest
Correct.
in this case, one thing that is very Jewish is the clear agreement up front. It's your eyes are wide open to the agreement.
So the notion that when everything is agreed, it wasn't like he took off a pound of flesh. He got him to agree to it. So besides for it being inappropriate, which certainly it is, what if the person agrees to those terms? Is it binding?
Well, if you're not supposed to even cut yourself to show that you
Oh, we
are,
had that in the parsha last week.
yeah,
Right.
to show that you are
Can't
mourning
defile.
for someone, you're not supposed to mutilate your body. Can you imagine?
Mm.
That you're gonna actually remove some flesh? I mean,
Right.
that has got to be totally
So you're
different.
saying now we have a contract that violates Torah law,
Yeah.
and being that the contract itself violates Torah law, the contract should be void.
Yeah.
Interesting, because
My
or
opinion.
Or he's converting to Judaism, and this is
Or you
Hell,
can't create a contract that's
Exactly.
binding when it's based on wrongness.
Correct.
So
If it's just inappropriateness, then maybe it's not the best thing to do, but is it legal? But if it actually violates Torah, then there are times where we say the whole contract is void because from the beginning the contract should have never gotten off the ground,
Right.
Yeah.
In American law, and I don't know where the origin of this is, and I've forgotten the exact term, but in essence, if the person you're going to contract, if the person that needs your services is truly desperate, you can't completely take advantage of them. The classic example is
Interesting.
a port in a storm, and you're in a boat and you must moor your boat because of a rough storm. And someone says, "Great, $2,000 a day." You have no choice. You're truly desperate. That's against the law.
Interesting.
In-
There's legal
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
recently,
How about raising prices in a hunger or something like that?
recently they've had to pass new laws with the water and food going into places that have
So,
been
so
devastated.
those are, I guess, extensions of that idea. But in essence, you can't completely take advantage of people.
Right. I mean, the one thing that comes to mind here is in front of a blind person, don't put a stumbling block. And we know that doesn't only mean not to put a banana peel in front of someone that is physically blind, but it has other applications as well. If someone is blind in a subject or they are vulnerable, you cannot take advantage of that weakness.
But here the person was aware of the situation. But I'm saying that maybe he's so desperate for money he'll
Right.
agree to something he doesn't think he has to worry
Interesting.
about. The desperate part of it.
Right, and that would be what's problematic here. Right? Anyone else? Amnon or anyone else online?
No.
Okay. So, Pam, did you want to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. So, what is interesting is that we have a book. Now, this is only about 100 years old, this book. Fascinating. This guy was a brilliant Talmudist. And he did something called the Encyclopedia Talmudis. Okay? So, taking all the 60-odd tractates of the Talmud and making encyclopedia out of it. So, if you put in, interest, you have everything the Talmud says about interest. You put up, Babylonia, what does it say about Babylonia? But that required, again, this is pre-computer days and
Yeah, that's-
whatnot,
Impressive.
vast
Wow,
vast
that is.
knowledge of that. So, but, this is the last 100 years. His name was Rabbi Zevin, passed away in 1978. He was the one that put together this work. Not to be confused with I think there's an Encyclopedia Judaic. There's
Yeah.
two different ones. This is the Talmud. So, Marty, why don't you start text one?
Text one. Literature abounds in many languages discussing the character of Shylock. Some see him as a stalwart person who rose to defend his honor. After being beleaguered by Antonio, he parted with his money in order to be able to avenge his nemesis. Others see him as a corrupt villain. Just as scholars debate the true character of Shylock, so do they debate Shakespeare's intentions when penning this play. However, there's one detail that the critics have not discussed altogether. Shylock presented his contract to the Venetian court, which recognized its legality and force, but chose to see convoluted means to entrap Shylock. But what would the ruling have been if Shylock had presented his contract with a strange contingency to a Jewish bet din? Does the contract between Shylock and Antonio have any legitimacy in Talmudic law?
Was Shakespeare known to be anti-Semitic or not?
Yeah,
I don't.
Well, he was anti-religious.
But that was his time. Don't forget that was England in that time. Hadn't they thrown all the Jews out about that time?
When did Shakespeare?
1500s.
Oh, that early?
16, yeah,
But-
but he was anti-religious, period.
Yes, but then he gave Shylock that wonderful speech that we all had to memorize. Hath not a Jew blood and flesh, and
Right,
when you
yeah.
prick me, do we not bleed, and all that. So I think that was very sympathetic to Jews, saying, yes, we are just like you.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not.
Do you know that?
I'm not well read
So
enough in
humanity
Shakespeare. This is
in
out of my league, so
general.
I'll stick to the Talmud.
But he's, I think, commenting on humanity in general, not just the Jews.
Maybe.
Don't we
I think
all
he's-
bleed?
So,
Don't we
so the
Jewish thing.
question
Okay.
here, how we're going to see in Jewish law whether or not such a contract would be legitimate. I'm not asking if it's proper. We know it's not proper. Legitimate would be other cases where someone does something that is dangerous. And what is the general Jewish attitude towards risk, danger? All right. Can I do some crazy extreme sport that has a 15% chance of, Now, we had a course once on this. There's obviously a certain place we draw the line, where Judaism recognizes to live life inherently means we take risks. We don't forbid flying on airplanes or even helicopters or driving or whatnot. So we don't, there's a certain amount. We just got to live life. But to do an activity that is very, very dangerous has Jewish, not just spiritual, but legal ramifications. Okay?
Who defines dangerous?
So there are in the Talmud, it breaks down, even if you want to know percentages. But the question is how far we take it. I know that when the risks of smoking first were coming out, okay, people turned to some of the rabbinic scholars at that time to write. Again, people will still make their own decisions, right? Everyone makes their own decisions. There's no bet in that enforces today. But it does mean something to some religious Jews if their rabbi comes out and says, you can't do this. And they asked his name was Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who was a leading halachic opinion, 1950s, 60s, living in New York. And at that time, I don't know how much of the danger of smoking in 1960s, how much.
Yeah.
Oh, it came out in 1965, the Surgeon General's report.
So he writes, I don't think it's a good idea, discourage it, but I cannot go as far as saying it's not allowed. That's what he writes. His son-in-law says that had he been living today, he might be saying something differently, But again, that doesn't mean people won't do what they want. People still do what they want, but it does mean something if you hear this opinion from a rabbi. I mean, texting and driving is dangerous. It is, and I have to remind myself of that. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. So look at the question that came up here in text 2. Keep in mind, hunting was never a Jewish activity. Jews just didn't hunt. First of all, we couldn't eat the food because we had to shecht it. We had to slaughter it. And B is, between the cruelty to animals, it just wasn't a Jewish sport. Talk about Yisroel the lion, not a Jewish thing. But this was an interesting question. I guess it was so uncommon that the question even came up. And do you mind reading?
The question has been posed regarding a man blessed by God with a large estate and who owns fields and forests teeming with wildlife. Is he permitted to go hunting, or is a Jew prohibited from doing so? There is a prohibition involved, for the hunter must enter the forest among the wildlife and place himself in grave danger. And the Torah states, and you shall watch yourselves very well. How then can a Jew place himself among wild praying beasts?
Now, he had a ... There was a long answer. And in the middle, he discusses a lot of other issues, such as the cruelty to animals component, right? Such as wastefulness, because especially if you're not eating the food, the idea of hunting just for sport is wasteful. You're wasting. There's the cruelty component, so he talks about many different components. It jumps straight to, and on all of those issues, he says it's strongly discouraged. He didn't go out, it's forbidden halachically. But when it came to this danger, I guess in those days he went out to the wildlife. I don't know what was out there, lions, tigers, bears, he said, you can't put your life in danger. Maybe it was really,
So I guess in here it would matter on what are the components of the wildlife involved. Like if he's just overrun with deer that really need to be called, and he's going to hunt them and give them to the local people where the kosherness of the meat is not an issue.
Correct.
Not, that might well be
Correct. Well, first of all, it's not dangerous there,
Right,
and
right,
there it's being used exactly. In
Right.
this, it was dangerous, it was wasteful, and there was the cruelty to animals as well. So this issue of not doing an activity that could be dangerous to you is very Jewish. How does that relate to the Parsha? Let's dive into the Parsha now. This is the opening words of Parsha. The name of the Parsha is Shoftim, which means judges. Pam.
That's 3A.
3a.
You shall set up judges and law enforcement officials for yourself in all your cities that the Lord your God is giving you, for your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment.
So they have to judge mishpat tzedek, judgment of righteousness. There is a mitzvah to have in the Torah to appoint judges, to have a court system. And in fact, any city of a certain size had an obligation to have a court system. Okay. Let's see what Maimonides writes about that. Why don't you read? Let's do this quickly.
It is a positive scriptural commandment to appoint judges and enforcement officers in every city and in every region. As it is stated, you shall set up judges and law enforcement officials for yourself in all your cities. Judges refers to magistrates whose attendance is fixed in court, before whom the litigants appear. First, a Supreme Court is established in the temple. This is called the Great Sanhedrin. It was composed of 71 judges.
One of the chambers in the actual Holy Temple of Jerusalem was where they were. So if you're wondering what happened in the Holy Temple other than the prayer and the sacrifices, the Beit Din, the big Beit Din of 71 was there. That Beit Din was given, first of all, the biggest cases, the most challenging cases, but also any issue that involved the Jewish people as a nation had to be done by them. There were times even going to war. There were times whether or not he made a year a leap year. Anything that involved the entire Jewish people would have to be done by them. Next.
In addition, 2 courts of 23 judges each are appointed. One holds sessions at the entrance to the temple courtyard and the other at the entrance to the temple mount.
Okay. Then there were courts of 23 judges, and I just want to cut because of time. Then there was small courts of 3 judges. The courts of 3 judges could deal only with monetary issues. They could not deal with more severe or capital cases. 23 could do capital. The 70 could do the 71 could do that. Okay.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Sure.
You know how last week, I guess, we were creating cities of
refuge,
sanctuary for murderers. Okay, so that, and then there was something else where murder is a crime, and with all of this. So what did that sanctuary do for them?
No, so first of all, as soon as someone murdered someone, they would flee to that city, and that was a safe haven until their court case came. Okay? The court case had to be in front of a court of 23. They would decide if it was what we call first-degree murder, which means premeditated, or was it something that was more accidental. Okay?
Manslaughter.
Yeah, I don't like manslaughter because the only ones that would run to the city of refuge was not when you meant to hurt someone but not kill them, but when it was completely an accident, such as
Voluntary.
Car wreck.
It's interesting. There's different levels even in involuntary. There's some involuntary that is not your fault at all. God forbid someone is driving and someone else runs into the street last minute. You're right? Then there's types of accidental that there's a large degree of fault. Texting and driving and not, Then there are the ones where it wasn't your fault, but perhaps had you been a little more careful, that could have been avoided. Those were the times where they would have to run to the city and have some time of rehabilitation.
But what about those that plotted and planned?
That was capital punishment. If text 4, let's do the next verse.
One witness shall not rise up against any person for any iniquity or for any sin, regarding any sin that he will sin. By the mouth of 2 witnesses or by the mouth of 3 witnesses shall the matter be confirmed.
So in Judaism, it required 2 witnesses. How often today does a crime happen in front of 2 witnesses?
Or even one.
or even one. And this is why so many of the punishments in Torah never actually happened. The Torah lays out a certain reality, but it never actually happened because there had to be two witnesses. The laws are even more complex. The witnesses had to warn them. There's many, many conditions that had to happen before the laws were actually carried out. So that's why no one was ever put to death, people for murder, on circumstantial evidence. It didn't happen. It couldn't happen. So
what was the punishment? I'm sorry. Did they have jails in the times?
they did not. The jails were not generally used unless they really thought someone was a total threat to society. From reading the Talmud, it sounds like that didn't happen often. I would like to believe they were living amongst them. Most of the people were mentioned, I hope.
But the threat was that they'd sort of excommunicate you, which is a fate worse than death of a Jew, I think, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
They could do that. They could. You're right. That's interesting.
Social pressure was larger.
Right, social pressures. But there wasn't jail. There was monetary fines that would often happen. I guess today we call that civil, right? And there's the civil case after the.
And I assume those monetary fines were enforced with.
Yeah, that's we'll look at the beginning of the parsha. It says judges and what's the next word?
What does that
Law
mean?
enforcement officials.
Does that
So
mean
you
that-
had to appoint both the judge as well as the policeman who will ensure that it was carried out.
Didn't we also learn in last week's that you could pay off your criminal thing by being a slave, but like sort of a slave?
It's indentured servant.
Yeah.
Correct. That was one of the ways you do it, and that would be something also done under one of these courts. Here's the question. So 2 witnesses were necessary in order to have serious punishments. Even, what about admission?
What about what?
Admission.
Oh,
If
admission.
someone admits, so in secular law, what is the status of admission?
Guilty.
Guilt, yeah.
Well,
Jail.
I don't mean to all turn to
not
you, Marty.
necessarily, because what happens is some of the admissions are coerced.
Mm.
And there's the big case of the Central Park joggers who recently served many years in prison because they confessed. And it was found out that they didn't do it, and the confessions were they were held 36, 48 hours without.
Really?
And they were promised. They were promised. There was 16 years promised to go home if they confessed. They confessed. There was no corroboration of witnesses at all.
Sounds like
And,
Soviet Union or something over here. I mean, that happened also.
Everybody was anxious to find those
Right.
people. So
and then
wow.
it turned out when DNA evidence was
Wow.
available that the rapist. And
So sad.
So how do they ensure that when they have a trial
they
today?
don't insure it. So
Okay.
you can have circumstantial evidence and stuff like that.
But I think your premise is a genuine admission.
A general admission
A
is
genuine
Yeah.
admission.
Genuine.
Yeah. What's a genuine admission? Though?
right. I mean, on the
Well, someone who freely admits the crime,
Right.
they're not being coerced. There are
Okay.
sufficient witnesses to that activity,
Oh,
It's funny because I was at
to the admission.
I was at a class
details.
last week where they discussed that, and I said, well, there are people, and I think it was Talmudic, there are people that just confess to anything.
Right.
So you
Mm.
can't rely that's why one of Jewish laws is you can't rely just on a confession because.
well, we're going to
a lot
get there in a
of people-
moment. Right.
Right.
Interesting. So what does the Talmud say about confession? So this is from Baba Metzia, which is one of the classic tractates of Talmud that discusses civil law. Let's do both 5a and 5b together. Where are we up to?
admission from the defendant is like the testimony of 100 witnesses.
So on one hand, we say nothing could be stronger than the person admitting, but there's a caveat there.
It is a scriptural decree that the court does not execute a person or have him lashed based on his own admission, only on the basis of the testimony of 2 witnesses.
So we have a difference. When it comes to monetary issues, that is when a confession is the same as 100 witnesses or 2 witnesses. And that is when they will administer punishment. They'll say you owe the money, right? Someone takes someone to court, you borrowed $1,000. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. And then the guy admits. He admits he owes $1,000, pay up. It's like 100 witnesses. But when it comes to anything that would have been capital, or even those where there was what was called malchus, which is lashes, another subject, they don't allow the admission doesn't work. It's so odd. Why not? The person's admitting.
Because sometimes when someone is coerced, even though there shouldn't be, the family gains monetary value or some kind of value.
So
Within those times, people, let's say if I confess to a crime, whether I did it or not, knowing that I was coerced because my family is going to gain a lot of people, that's why you cannot.
like a plea bar, when you do admit, then
Correct. Whether you did it or not, your family can gain monetary or they can gain in some other way within the community.
No, not if you're gonna be put to death. We're talking about capital punishment, so you
Well, it
admit
could
to
be-
capital
Or
punishment.
the
It doesn't
flogging.
matter whether it's capital punishment or not, that has occurred. Other people have confessed to things that they haven't done because in order to protect their family.
Oh,
Or in order for their
sorry.
family
Oh, I
to
see. So
have
it-
some kind of gain.
Interesting.
Yes.
So they
Yes.
feel justice was done. Otherwise, there's going to be this vendetta against the family forever. Interesting.
To protect.
Interesting.
Or
All
it
right.
could be someone that is depressed, let's say.
So that is what. Oh, very good. So Maimonides writes 5c.
The Sanhedrin,
What's the reason? So the question is, what is the reason? Why is it that confessions work powerfully for monetary disputes, but not for ones in which there is bodily harm? Whether the bodily harm is lashes or, God forbid, death. Maimonides.
The Sanhedrin, however, may not execute or lash a person on the basis of his own confession, for perhaps he became crazed concerning this matter. Perhaps he is one of those embittered people who are anxious to die and pierce their bellies with swords or throw themselves from the rooftops. Similarly, we fear that such a person may come and admit committing an act that he did not perform so that he will be executed. The general principle is that the disqualification of one's own testimony is a decree of the king.
What he means at the end is, as much as we can give reasons for it, it's a decree of Hashem, and we don't fully understand why there is this distinction. It's funny, because first he gives a reason, and at the end he says, at the end of the day, we don't really have a reason. But his reason is, who knows why a person would give a confession. Perhaps they are suicidal. Perhaps they just want to escape their fate over here. But that can't work over here. So that is the answer Maimonides gives. Someone else turns it the other way around. He says, the truth is, a man, a woman a confession should never work. Confession should never work. You really always should need objective outside witnesses. Why does it work when it comes to monetary issues?
Well, one principle, again, we have in American law, and I think it applies somewhat here, is the difference between a civil disagreement and a government individual disagreement. We're here to be guilty of a crime, you have to have, beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
Whereas to be found, I forgot the term in civil court, where you actually owe, it's likely.
Reasonable.
It's preponderance of the
Preponderance, right. And that's because
It's 51-49.
because we need protections from the state against the
Correct.
state, but against each other, whatever is more likely. Now, maybe the same idea is applying here. If you confess
It's still not
in a
foolproof.
civil matter, well, you probably did it, and you probably owe.
Right. I like that. Very good. So very good. Very, very good. These are all good reasons. So we're going to have one more here in text 6. I like, these are great suggestions. But fourth, we're going to have one more from the Tzosacheshen 134.
That a person is able to financially incriminate himself is because it is considered a gift, as one is able to obligate himself even when he has no inherent liability by committing to give a gift. We consider his confession as if he had said, I hereby obligate myself to give you X amount of money, and he is therefore held liable.
So he's saying, what's the reason why confession works with money? Because at the end of the day, we don't care whether you did it or you didn't do it. If you want to pay the person that money, kol hakavod, go for it. There's nothing the court can do to stop you from choosing to give someone their money. You have assets. You want to deal with them that way. The same way you could write the person a check on the spot, you can confess. But the difference is that when it comes to our bodies, when it comes to our life, when it comes to our health, we don't have that ability to do it. So that's the distinction, according to the Tzosacheshen. And he continues, this is beautiful, text 7. You want reading?
Sure. One can possibly suggest a reason. A person's soul is not his personal property, rather the property of God, as it is stated, behold, all souls are mine. Thus, admission regarding an item that is not his is ineffective. This reasoning explains why admission is not acceptable regarding lashes either, for lashes are a degree of death. However, his money is his own personal property. Thus, the rule
There's this idea that when it comes to our assets to a certain degree, I mean, there also you can say God entrusts us with our assets, right? It's a gift from above. However, Once God entrusts us with our assets, we choose what to do with them. The Torah certainly gives us mitzvot, how to use our money wisely, but at the end of the day, if someone writes an IOU to someone for half their worth, that's their choice. That choice is not there when it comes to our health. That choice is not there when it comes to our bodies. And, this is the difference. Reckless behavior when it comes to finances is not a good idea. I think it's not healthy. It's not fulfilling your purpose in the world. But Torah can't go as far as saying it's void. If someone wants to do it, now, I would say it this way. If someone has reckless behavior with their assets, we might call that wastefulness, bal tashchis. That's a separate prohibition. I would say the assets are theirs. They are now violating the wastefulness prohibition. But when it comes to health, it isn't that it's mine and now I'm treating it in a wasteful way. No, we say that's not mine. God leases our body to us, for God willing, 120 years. And every single day it is ours. It's ours because God is leasing it to us. And there's a difference the way we say that when it comes to our bodies and the way we say that in regards to our health. Even in halacha, very interesting. Let's do this inside. Pam, you have a question.
I have a question because it says that a person's soul is not his personal property. Understand that the soul is here, the soul ascends after you die. If you're put to death because you confess something, would be a capital punishment. That's a text 7 we just read. Rather, property of God as it is stated. So behold, all souls are mine. But that's a given. We're talking about killing someone, which is imparting, or lashing someone, which is imparting physical harm to the body, not to the soul. The soul has nothing to do with it. So why does it say the soul here? The soul is understood. Yeah, it's God's. But we're talking about putting a person to death based on its own admission.
Well, and the extension of that, it said the phrase I didn't really buy myself.
Right.
Lashes are a degree of death.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think it's a bit of a pulled argument to say, it's 1/70th of your life. Or
Correct.
Something. And so therefore you're killing yourself and that's prohibited, therefore you can't do it. I think that's a pretty long stretch.
That is a stretch. To say life, God gives life. Injury, you're saying, is to a far lesser degree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Non-life-threatening.
And I guess here is where we're sort of jumping to the end, but we can do that. We can skip around here. And I think the message here is that we have to be spiritually well. And so much of Judaism is about spiritual wellness, to be healthy, have a healthy heart, right? Healthy heart means to be loving and giving, and have a if the physical health is not in place, then guess what? It's much harder, I'm not saying it's impossible, it's harder to do a good job spiritually. The last text today, text 12b, was a letter that the Mizrich Maggid wrote to his son. His son was a person who was angelic in his behavior, in the sense that he almost never ate and never slept and just completely dedicated himself to mitzvot. And look what the Maggid of Mizrich writes to his son. And I'm skipping to text 20b now. Let's do 20b, just because we were discussing it.
148.
Want me to read
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Among the letters, that
The Maggid of Mizrich Maggid.
The Mizrich Maggid wrote to his son Rabbi Abraham, the angel. He writes that a small hole in the body makes a large hole in the soul. This gives us an understanding of how important it is to watch one's health. Indeed, it is among the ways of serving God.
It's a text that I think about often when I need extra motivation. I shouldn't need extra motivation to, take care of yourself. But isn't that interesting? When you're exercising, you're taking care of yourself, it's not just about my body. My body and my soul are married together. God sends down a soul to a particular body. And it's hard to do my mission properly when I'm not feeling great. It's hard to do my mission properly when I'm tired, or God forbid, worse. Now, obviously there are times where it's not our choice and we have health issues, and I don't think that's, you'd say you made a hole in your soul. Beyond our control. But in issues that are in our control, we should keep in mind, again, the other text, 12:20a from Maimonides. And remember, Maimonides is a doctor, and he writes, maintaining a healthy and sound body is amongst the ways of serving God. Maybe that sounds obvious to you, but it's neat to see it in Torah that wellness is about how we can serve God properly. This also connects even to the high holidays that we're going to have soon, when we're asking God for so much of our needs, physical needs, health needs. And it's sometimes we stop and say, what, is the high holidays like, December season for other people with kids in the world, where you have a wish list, I need this, I need that. And a beautiful perspective to have when you daven on the high holidays, God, I want to be able to do mitzvot in the world. I want to be able to be your agent of good in the world. Boy, is it much easier to do that when I don't have to be running to doctor's appointments. Boy, is it much easier to do that when I have ample livelihood and I have brachas that I can share with others. That's the perspective to have. And that is the perspective to even have when you are exercising. And here's a good way of knowing, are you going, some people go overboard. It's not about the body itself. The goal is not to have the most fit body in the world. The goal is, how can I have a healthy body in order that my soul, I can focus on what my soul needs to be doing in the world. That would be a Jewish perspective to it. So going back full circle, why is there this difference in Jewish law between the body? Money, when it comes to money, I can make good decisions, I can make bad decisions, but God allots my finances to myself, and I decide how to deal with it. But when it comes to my soul and my health, now I'm using the word soul and body more interchangeably. It's not mine to inflict harm. So when the person comes to the court, I did this. No, it doesn't work. You, based upon your confession, cannot do something that inflicts harm upon yourself, because it was never yours to do it.
So death by cop is that. That is.
Death by what?
Yeah, sure, that's suicide.
Yeah, that's
Right.
Death by what?
By what?
Oh, that's suicide. Death by
policeman.
cop.
Yeah.
I missed that. What is?
Death by cop is when you're a lunatic waving a gun like you're going to threaten people and basically force the police to shoot you. While you don't intend to shoot the police, you're in a threatening way where they have to kill you. That's death by cop.
Right.
Never heard that.
And again, obviously,
The past few
obviously
years, a lot
this
of youth
is
has been doing that.
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to commit suicide, and for religious reasons, they're using the policeman.
And obviously this is such a sensitive issue when it comes to suicide and similar things like that. And it's interesting, in Jewish law, on one hand, based upon what we said today, it's clear that it's not allowed. And on the other hand, there's a beautiful teaching in Judaism that when someone, God forbid, does commit suicide, what do we say? They weren't themselves when they made that decision. They weren't in the proper frame of mind when they made that decision. There are even places that we try saying that maybe last minute they had a thought of teshuvah and it was too late. But we always give the benefit of the doubt, either by saying it wasn't them who made the decision or they had a thought of teshuvah. But that's just how serious this issue is.
But you still bury them outside, don't you?
Today that's
No,
done
that's not
because
done anymore?
we almost always do this, like I just said, making that judgment call.
Because I remember in Brazil when I was a teenager, there was a famous Jewish person that was interrogated by the police, because at that time it wasn't really a democracy, it's like the military, and he died in captivity. I mean, he died while during the interrogation, and they claimed, the government claimed that he killed himself. So the family refused to bury him outside the walls and he was buried because, that was a big affront, apparently.
In Jewish, they refused to bury him in the actual cemetery?
No, the family, because it's suicide.
Oh.
So the official thing was that he committed suicide. The Jewish family refused to bury him outside the walls.
Right.
Because they claimed that it was murder.
Sure,
But
sure.
the government said that he committed suicide.
But still, we always do benefit of the doubt when it comes to any issue that I've ever heard about or dealt with. We give the benefit of the doubt in this. It's almost like those teachings are there in order that we should recognize the severity of it.
Right.
But there's the before and there's the after. And the before is we do everything in our power for life and prevent and to get people to help. But after the fact, we give them the benefit of the doubt, and they weren't thinking properly. They weren't in the right way of doing it. So that is the difference, but there's some other text that we sort of just skipped for a moment. Let's even do in the Code of Jewish Law, text 10, it is forbidden to strike one's fellow even if the other person gives you permission. Again, come on, I want to suffer some of you, I want to see how many punches I can hand. You're not allowed to do that. But the person agreed. No, you cannot inflict. It's not their choice to agree to be punched. Very interesting.
What about something like boxing?
Yeah, there was a huge
To
make money that Jewish boxing in America.
I mean, I know someone of that's an interesting.
It's tougher because it's not like a regular set of fisticuffs. First you do have padded.
Correct.
They were weekly padded.
Yeah. I know. Some call it a sport. I'm not advocating.
What is the long term? I mean, is it coming out more and more that there are long term health serious health
Sure.
risks?
That's Muhammad Ali.
I know Muhammad Ali, and is that just Muhammad Ali, or that's more and more?
Well,
common?
it is a sport that facilitates concussions.
That's
So does
What about
football,
So is football
soccer,
and everything else.
cheerleading.
So here, but here is where I say there is a line that is drawn in halacha. Torah doesn't say we can't have any risk in life. It doesn't do that. We're allowed to. It also says that there is a difference why we are doing that risk. Obviously, if there is a strong, some professions are more risky than other professions. But if the nature of the profession is one in which you're doing it for the betterment of society and helping others, you can imagine that would be treated very differently than someone just wanting to do some exotic sports. So there is a certain line, and I don't have the answers right now where that is. Again, it's not enforced by anyone today, but it's good to know that we don't encourage very dangerous behaviors because we got to take care of these bodies in order that we can be in the position to serve God properly. Yeah.
Boy, would I be excommunicated.
What?
So if we don't hunt,
Yeah.
I never heard because it put ourselves in danger of the beasts.
Sure.
I always thought we don't hunt because of
The cruelty to the animals, which is another
Yeah.
component.
But if we don't hunt because it's dangerous to us, why on earth would we do boxing, which I don't get that being a sport. Why on earth would people put themselves in a position of having their heads banged in?
I mean, it's a good profession. It makes them,
How does it become a profession? That's what I need to know.
Well, no. It is a profession. You can disagree with it, and I do too. But it is a sport. It is a profession. It is popular. Is it appropriate profession? I think there's room to talk about that.
People
Right.
gambled on it, and they were making money, so they were paying people to do it.
Oh, kind of like
So that-
throwing the Christians to the lions. That was a sport also.
I'm not defending it.
Right.
It is a profession.
So I think we could have another class on where the lines are drawn when it comes to enjoyable recreational activities. But if you're a cop, you're risking your life every day. But that's for
Right.
other
It's a
people.
different
Remember,
thing.
That's very different.
Remember the Army, same thing.
A member of the army, absolutely. Or other times you're saving someone's life. You're putting yourself, in risk, and that's very different. That's treated very differently. So we will hold it here. But I think for me, the take home is it's a nice meditation to have, even when it comes to taking care of ourselves physically. Taking care of ourselves physically is also allowing us to be taking care of ourselves spiritually, and proper fitness and wellness. And these are things that are important Jewishly, not just physically.
Do this one for you, Governor.
Which one?
No forgiving.
Text 1?
12.
Well, I'm going to read it. The court is enjoined to not accept ransom from any murderer to spare him from execution, even if he gave all the money in the world, and even if the next of kin was willing to forgive him, he should be executed. The rationale is that the soul of the victim is not the property of the next of kin, but the property of the Holy One, blessed be he. As it is stated, do not accept ransom for the soul of a murderer.
So this is someone who was clearly a murderer. They had the witnesses. I told you how rare that was.
Right,
the
right.
court says it was once in 70 years it happened.
So you're
But if it did happen, someone was a real murder, and it was premeditated, and there were witnesses, and there were warning, and there was not a shadow of a doubt, and then the family says, don't do it, that doesn't make a difference. That's interesting.
Yeah, because you could turn around and do it again.
Right, and it's not the family, again, I mean,
not
this is a
there.
difficult law.
Right.
I don't want to end off on this note, this is not the take-home here,
Yeah.
but this is just to prove this idea, why there is that distinction in
You're
Jewish
talking about the
law.
family of the victim is not.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's an interesting thing. And also, if it's true that that our bodies are not ours, they're on loan to us, then certainly the body as well as the soul didn't belong to the next of kin.
Correct. All right, we'll hold it here. Any questions, Amnon?
No questions here. Don't hang up when you're done.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, if you would like to help this program continue, we deeply appreciate your support to nissancommunications.com. Thank you for tuning in.
Can I say something about a course we discussed with this group?
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCBVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.